The conquest of Earth was supposed to be a highly ordered affair. General Vlack of the Syndic hegemony had handpicked New Jersey as the primary strike node. Orbital scans revealed an unprecedented density of government administrative data streams in the area. "We strike at the very heart of their bureaucracy," Vlack hissed, his compound eyes fixed on the monitors. "Sever the head, and the body will naturally perish." At exactly 1:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, 12 stealth orbital drop pods smashed right through the roof of the New Jersey Department of Motor Vehicles. Drywall dust drifted down like snow over the scuffed linoleum floor. As the smoke cleared, 12 elite Syndic heavy assault troopers materialized. Their antimatter shields crackled, and their multi-phase Devastator rifles were leveled dead at the terrified Earthling. Or rather, the Earthlings who should have been terrified. Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed that soul-sucking DMV drone. In the row 4 waiting area, Tony the plumber didn't even bother to look up. He just irritably dusted a chunk of pulverized drywall off his work jacket. Over at window 6, the clerk Dolores slowly set down her plastic next sign. She nudged her reading glasses up her nose, stared deadpan at the 9-foot-tall Captain Zorn, who currently had a rifle barrel shoved practically up her nostrils, and popped a giant, pink bubblegum bubble. "You didn't pull a number," Dolores drawled. There wasn't a single ounce of survival instinct in her voice, just a bottomless, soul-crushing wave of annoyance. "Go to the red machine. Pull a ticket. If you're here to conquer Earth, you gotta fill out Form 8C, and it's blue or black ink only. Next." She yanked open her counter drawer with a clatter, pulled out a stack of blank forms, and aggressively slapped the top 8C right onto the bulletproof glass. Smack. The sheer force made the whole pane vibrate. A heavy-duty metal stapler bounced off her desk, spun through the air, and clanged into the gap of the maze like metal line dividers. Instantly, the irritation level in the waiting room spiked straight past the red line. 300 New Jersey-ins, who'd been holding in their piss and vinegar all afternoon, absolutely lost it. A rolling wave of profanity cascaded down the labyrinth of metal stanchions. Nobody gave a rat's ass that these were aliens capable of vaporizing tanks. All they cared about was that this 9-foot-tall son of a bitch just cut the line. Tony's knuckles were turning white around the grip of his pipe wrench. 3 hours? He'd been standing there for 3 goddamn hours trying to replace his stolen plumbing license. His legs were numb. He hadn't even dared to go grab an iced coffee out of fear he'd miss his number. And now this glowing, armored bastard was just gonna waltz up to the window? He let out a low grunt, shoved a folding chair out of his way, and charged. He swung his 24-inch heavy-duty pipe wrench like a baseball bat, bringing it down viciously on the door of the orbital pod still wedged into the ceiling. Crack! A chunk of metal laced with a cold blue antimatter coating sheared right off. It skittered across the non-slip linoleum and came to a dead stop right next to Zorn's polished armored boot. The entire hall went dead silent for exactly 1 second. Then it erupted into an even more savage chorus of swearing. Everyone glared daggers at Zorn, their eyes burning with a rage usually reserved for scumbags who dine and dash. Zorn's 9-foot frame locked up. In his 40 standard cycles of life, he had slaughtered his way from the galactic rim to the core sector. Never had a primitive dared to smash his assault pod to his face. And no one had ever ignored his multi-phase Devastator rifle while it was mounted on a counter. His antimatter shield flared, blue arcs snapping violently. His coarse alien fingers tightened around the trigger, knuckles turning a bruised violet in his fury. A blistering blue-white plasma beam roared from the muzzle. It grazed the bent metal line dividers and slammed directly into the chipped red ticketing machine sitting dead center in the hall. There was no earth-shattering explosion, just a dull hiss. The entire machine, From its cracked plastic shell to its ancient circuit boards, right down to the rolled-up spool of paper tickets, was vaporized instantly. Tiny droplets of semi-molten plastic splattered onto the linoleum, sending up plumes of acrid white smoke. Zorn engaged his cervical universal translator. His booming roar made the bulletproof glass shudder. Worms! Witness the divine wrath of the Syndic hegemony, he choked on the words, freezing mid-sentence. The once deafening hall went graveyard silent for another 3 seconds. Then an oppressive wave of pure, unadulterated hostility bore down on him through the winding maze of aisles. It was thick with the muggy heat, the cloying scent of pink bubblegum, stale body odor, and the sheer, towering rage of a 3-hour wait. Over 300 pairs of bloodshot eyes, having baked in this hell all afternoon, locked onto him like a targeting array. Tony the plumber, standing next to the dinged-up drop pod, clamped his hand over the back of a folding metal chair. His knuckles were bone white, alien shrapnel dust still packed tight beneath his fingernails. He roared an expletive and hurled the folding chair right at Zorn's face. The 9-foot captain was fast. His antimatter shield snapped to full power, and the rest of his heavy assault squad immediately followed suit. The hall flared with a blinding flash of blue energy. The iron chair slammed into the shield and crumpled into twisted scrap. But the momentum of that toss had already ignited the mob. Everyone pushed forward. The metal Q stanchions buckled and twisted with a screeching groan. Loafers, work boots and sneakers pounded the floor, driving the surge forward. Thermoses, briefcases, and rolled-up license applications rained down on Zorn like a hailstorm. An antimatter shield could absorb the energy yield of a multi-phase blast, sure. But it couldn't do jack against the raw kinetic mass of 300 pissed-off humans crushing forward. Zorn's boots gouged twin black skid marks across the linoleum. He was shoved backward, entirely out of control, until his armored back slammed hard against the bulletproof glass of window 6. The impact made Dolores' blank 8C forms jump half an inch off her desk. Behind the counter, Dolores didn't even blink. She just kept chewing her pink gum, blowing a bubble bigger than her fist. Zorn's thick fingers clawed at his trigger. He wanted to open fire, but the crush of bodies was compressing his ribs right into his lung. He managed to lift his arm halfway before the surging tide pinned it right back against his chest. His translator spat out a chaotic burst of electronic static. The rest of his heavy assault squad was likewise immobilized, wedged tight in the human meat grinder. Tony tossed aside the mangled iron chair. The 24-inch heavy wrench tucked into his waistband felt cold against his gut. He shoved past 2 guys in front of him, took a step up, and hoisted the massive steel pipe wrench high over his head. In geosynchronous orbit aboard the Syndic command dreadnought, the live feed beamed directly to General Vlak. His holographic monitor was entirely choked with a writhing mass of human shadows. The blue blip representing Captain Zorn's vitals flickered like a candle in a hurricane. Vlak, a warlord renowned for his rigid-by-the-book tactical precision, felt his purple visage flush into a deep, mottled plum. His massive, scaled claws reached slowly toward the console. His finger hovered over the anti-gravity hover tank airdrop button. The cold blue glow of the holoscreen illuminated 3 jagged battle scars that cut straight across his skull. On the display, the 12 red markers representing his strike team were squashed together into a single blob, pinned dead against the DMV's bulletproof glass. They couldn't move an inch. Captain Zorn's fractured comms crackled through the static. General, antimatter shields are holding. Multi-phase weapons are fully operational. But I can't break through the mass. These primitives aren't taking cover. They're just piling on top of us. My lungs are gonna rupture. The logic cores within Vlach's cranium hummed. He was a decorated Syndic general who had conquered 17 star systems. Nowhere in his tactical doctrines was there an entry for heavy armor battalion, immobilized by the bare flesh of primitive. This was a naked, glaring insult to the hegemony. His coarse scales tightened in rage as he slammed his fist down onto the drop button. 2 stealthed orbital drop pods, housing state-of-the-art anti-gravity hover tanks, immediately detached from the dreadnought's underbelly. Trailing crimson exhaust, they tore through Earth's atmosphere, plummeting toward the target coordinates at terminal velocity. Vlach stroked the edge of his command console, waiting to watch these loudmouth natives get pasted to the walls by heavy ordnance. 2 deafening thuds blasted through the dreadnought's audio pickups. Shrapnel of asphalt and gravel blew dozens of feet into the air. As the dust settled, 2 sleek, gunmetal gray anti-gravity hover tanks floated steadily over the DMV parking lot. The grav base of the first tank hovered perfectly, dead center, right over the red and yellow hashed lines of the fire lane. The hum of the anti-grav field had barely stabilized, rippling the parking lot tarmac with heat wave. Carmine was pinching a half-smoked menthol. He had just slipped a $50 parking ticket under the wiper of an illegally parked Honda when he looked up and spotted this new hunk of junk. Pedestrians who had dodged the airdrop's shockwave yelped and scrambled behind a nearby dumpster. Carmine just flicked the ash off his cigarette. He jammed his patrol cap down tight, and his right hand reached around to the small of his back for the heavy metal parking boot he'd carried for 20 years. 20 pounds of ice-cold steel. It had booted Ferraris, and it had booted moonshine-hauling pickups. It had never failed him once. When it came to parking violations, Carmine was an equal opportunity bastard. He strolled over, taking his sweet time. The anti-grav backwash whipped the bottom of his uniform shirt around. He hopped up onto the 6-inch curb. His left hand grabbed the tank's port side mine deflection grill. His right hand lined up the boot's jaws with the interlocking grate. He put his back into it and shoved. Click, clack. The sharp snap of the locking cylinder engaging cut right through the roar of the engines. The entire tank instantly threw a fit. Overload klaxons screeched like a strangled chicken. The previously steady chassis violently dropped, scraping half its grav base against the asphalt and kicking up black dust. The drive system locked up completely. Hovering a grand total of half an inch off the deck, the war machine couldn't move a millimeter. Carmine hopped back down to the tarmac and dusted off his hands. He pulled out his citation pad and was just about to rip off a slip when he caught something out of his peripheral. The second anti-grav tank was spooling up. The armored cockpit pulsed with cold light as the chassis began to lift off. 15 feet of solid steel shuddered, spraying gravel everywhere, clearly prepping to ascend and blow the DMV's roof to kingdom come. Over by the exit, Big Dave, a trucker who'd been waiting 4 hours to renew his commercial hauling permit, was already half-cocked from the ticketing machine getting blown to bits. Seeing this iron bastard trying to take off, Dave slammed his rig into reverse and redlined his 700-horsepower diesel engine. Head just finished towing a busted pickup, and his heavy-duty drop forge hook was still dangling loose out back. 120 pounds of solid steel hook and cable clanked wildly as the rig surged backward. Clang! The hook bit deep into the hover tank's underbelly exhaust grating. The tank had only made it halfway up, its thrusters not yet running at full capacity. The diesel engine yanked that steel cable so tight it looked like a solid iron rod. The 18-wheeler's tires dug twin 2-inch deep trenches of burning rubber into the asphalt, choking half the parking lot in a cloud of black smoke and heat. Crunch! The entire exhaust grating ripped clean off. The 900-ton steel behemoth nose dived straight back into the pavement, hitting so hard it shook 3 panes of glass right out of the DMV lobby window. The grav engines shorted out and died on the spot. The cockpit hatch jammed solid. The alien crew couldn't even poke a head out if they tried. The crowd pouring out to watch the spectacle erupted in cheers. Empty coffee cups and crumpled application forms rained from the sky. Carmine, puffing his menthol right down to the filter, ambled over to the second tank. He pulled out his blank ticket pad, bit the cap off his pen, scribbled furiously, and slapped the bright slip right onto the cold glass of the cockpit. Illegal parking in a designated fire lane, endangering public safety. $1,200 fine. Take it inside and get in line to pay. He tucked the pad back into his belt, straightened up, and squinted up at the lead gray New Jersey sky. Deep in orbit, a faint flash of cold blue light had just flared. Up in the command bridge of the Syndic dreadnought Conqueror, General Vlach's compound eyes were glued to his tactical holoscreen. 3 seconds ago, the cold blue blips of his twin anti-grav tanks had winked out. All he pulled from the static-choked comms were 2 broken transmissions, drivetrain locked. Some kind of high-density alloy ring has compromised the intake grill, and we got dragged out of the sky by a primitive combustion engine. Vlach's chitinous knuckles cracked. In 900 cycles of conquest, he had never seen a clusterfuck of this magnitude. Antimatter shields, designed to shrug off megaton nuclear strikes, couldn't stop a hunk of rusty iron. Hover tanks built to flatten armored brigades, bested by a native driving a semi-truck. It was nonlinear garbage that defied every tactical doctrine ever written. Unpredictable, barbaric parlor tricks. His logic cores were literally overheating, smoking from the strain. He backhanded the ceramic edge of his control panel, shattering it to dust, and roared into the standby assault frequency. All units mobilize. Pull 50 of our most elite heavy infantry. Maximize shields. Full munition. Airdrop directly onto the main steps of the target structure and clear the grid. Vaporize any primitive that dares resist and secure that goddamned administrative hub. 50 clusters of cold blue thruster fire tore through the overcast Jersey sky. The backwash ripped street signs out of the pavement and blew 6 parking meters into the weeds, shaking the DMV's bulletproof windows to their frames. 50 heavily armed Syndic troopers touched down in perfect formation just past the curb. Their antimatter shields pulsed with a sinister glow. In absolute unison, they shouldered their multi-phase devastators, weapons glowing a lethal purple. Armored boots crushed the gravel as they marched in lockstep right up the main stairs of the DMV. Metal treads ground over the cracks on the 3rd step. 50 antimatter shields cast cold blue halos, fracturing the harsh afternoon sun into blinding shards. The strike team's pacing was flawless. Even their respiratory cycles were synchronized to exact hegemony military protocol. Over by the faded brown barricades of the road test area, driving examiner Bob tucked his clipboard tight under his armpit. He grabbed the battered bullhorn slung around his neck, thumbed the power, and let out a piercing screech of feedback that completely drowned out the marching armor. Halt. Every last one of you freeze. He snatched up a copy of the New Jersey Driver's Manual, a tome roughly the thickness of a cinder block, and chucked it dead at the lead assault captain's face. The hardcover slammed into the antimatter shield with a heavy thud, completely killing the captain's forward momentum and dead stopping him halfway up the steps. This is a designated DMV road test zone. Unauthorized armed entry means immediate disqualification for all involved. You're barred from testing for 5 years. Now get your asses back behind the curb and wait for your number to be called. Bob's voice blasted through the bullhorn with enough force to flake the top layer of concrete right off the stairs. 20-odd Jersey drivers waiting for their road tests instantly joined the fray. They waved their IDs and Aquafina bottles, hollering, "Back it up! Can't you see the man's proctoring an exam? Learn some damn manners. No cutting in line. Get the hell out of here." 50 heavily armed Syndic elites stood frozen on the step. 50 multi-phase rifles hung mid-air. Not a single trooper dared to move. Their tactical databases contained 720 planetary assault protocols. They had contingencies for everything from native biological uprisings to full-scale nuclear retaliation. Not once did the database mention driving instructor chucks manual at your face to block the path. The assault captain's universal translator finished rendering the last line of Bob's rant. The tactical reticles on his visor instantly short-circuited into a vibrating mess of static. Deep inside the lobby, Captain Zorn, who had been crushed unconscious against the bulletproof glass by a few hundred people, was starting to come to. The respiratory system behind his faceplate slowly found its rhythm. The armored servos in his cervical spine gave a faint, rusty squeal. Zorn's 9-foot armored bulk leaned heavily against the cold metal railing, hacking violently. The stifling air, stewed for 3 hours by 300 sweaty New Jersey-ians, reeking of BO, buttered popcorn, and 3-day-old spilled iced coffee, flooded his filtration mask. His core processors throbbed. As the premier ground assault captain of the Syndic hegemony, he had cleaved through the planetary shields of 3 rebel worlds. Right now, he couldn't even raise his arm without elbowing a portly old lady holding a ShopRite bag. The old lady promptly drove her elbow hard into his shield and snapped, "Watch it! Stretch! I've been in this line all afternoon." His tactical orders were to secure the human administrative hub. He now fully understood the grim reality. To secure the hub, he had to get past Windows 6. And to get past Windows 6, he had to fill out that godforsaken Form 8C Declaration of Conquest. Zorn extended his massive, armored fingers and pinched the cheap plastic ballpoint pen rolling across the counter. The thing was barely thicker than the tip of his vibro dagger. It kept slipping through his spiked gauntlet. On the first stroke, he applied too much pressure. The nib tore through half the page, and the plastic barrel shattered with a sharp crack into a dozen jagged splinters. Grinding his external mandibles, he grabbed a second pen. He barely managed to scratch out 3 crooked words before his grip hitched. The pen exploded down the middle, showering the bulletproof glass in plastic shrapnel. The waiting room erupted in a chorus of jeers. The mocking laughter scraped against Zorn's audio sensors, kicking his armor's cooling fans into screaming overdrive. Attempt number 3. He practically suspended his life support respiration. Regulating his brute strength, he meticulously guided the pen, taking a full 30 seconds to fill in a single box. Finally, he finished the very last character. His fingers involuntarily twitched. Another sharp crack. Pen number 3 was reduced to dust. Zorn drew a deep breath of sweat-laden air. He pinched the completed Form 8C and slid it through the mail slot at the bottom of the bulletproof pane with his crude, armored digits. Dolores nudged her reading glasses up her nose. Chewing her pink gum, she lazily reached out and snagged the Declaration of Conquest, which was now crumpled like a piece of trash, thanks to his massive alien fingers. The bubble popped against her chin. She didn't wipe it off. She merely lowered her eyelids, scanning the pale green handwriting on the form. After crushing the third pen, Zorn had squeezed his own neon green alien blood out of his hand to use as ink. Dolores checked the very last signature box, which he had signed in the wrong place. She pinched the paper between her thumb and index finger. Reap! She tore the legal-sized document neatly down the middle. The 2 halves fluttered gently into the black trash can by her feet, already brimming with rejected form. You used alien green blood for ink. Her voice was as dry as a 10-year-old ream of copy paper. Zero inflection. Regulations strictly mandate blue or black ink. Form voided. Go back to the end of the line. The power relays inside Zorn's armored chest cavity roared with a deafening whine. His 9-foot frame drew taut as a bowstring inside the cramped waiting corral. Neon green blood dripped steadily from his clenched fist. His other hand dropped to his hip, fingers wrapping tightly around the leather grip of his vibro dagger. The only thing registering on Zorn's retinas was the torn, green-stained Form 8C sitting in the trash. The translator at the base of his skull spat static, looping, "Do is ice-cold decree through his logic cores over and over, form voided. Go back to the end of the line." He was a Syndic hegemony ground assault captain, a veteran of 100 planetary conquests. He had shattered planetary shields. He had cleaved through the alloy thrones of rival emperors. Never in his entire existence had some local primitive dared to take his official declaration of conquest, a document he spent 30 agonizing minutes and 3 crushed pens completing, and chuck it in the garbage like scrap paper, just because he used his own bleeding green ichor as ink. The power relays spun into a frenzy inside his chest, rattling his armor joints. Green blood dripped through his fingers onto the beige non-slip linoleum, blooming into dark emerald circles. The collective breathing and cursing of 300 New Jerseyans piled onto his back like burning coals. His antimatter shield could deflect multi-phase artillery, but it couldn't stop the sheer suffocating heat and bloodlust radiating from hundreds of irritated natives. Inside that tight labyrinth of stanchions, every ounce of their rage was laser-focused on him, the freak who cut the line. The air was hot enough to ignite his armor plating. His knuckles went rigid. His grip on the vibro dagger's leather hilt clamped down. His massive frame tensed like a loaded ballista. A guttural roar ripped from his throat, rattling the metal railing. Swing! The dagger cleared its sheath. The cold blue vibro blade ignited, humming with enough frequency to pulverize solid rock. He planted his bloody right hand on the lower lip of the bulletproof counter. He jammed his heavy armored boot onto the middle rung of the line divider. Hoisting half his body up against the thick glass, he leveled the glowing dagger dead at Dolores, who was still on the other side, blankly organizing her blank forms. The steel pipe wrench, packing 3 full hours of Tony's pent-up DMV rage, came crashing down hard on the joint of Zorn's glowing blue armored right hand. The sickening crunch completely overpowered Zorn's battle cry. A jagged fissure blew open across his armor plating. Fetid green blood splattered across the bulletproof glass and streaked down onto Dolores' freshly Windex counter. The vibro dagger flew out of his grasp. It clattered onto the linoleum, rolled half a turn, and wedged itself neatly beneath the metal railing. The 9-foot Syndic captain bellowed like a bull that just took a sledgehammer to the skull. He recoiled, his pulverized right hand hanging like wet noodles. Trembling, his crude green digits popped open an emergency compartment on his belt. He jammed a backup life support syringe right into his thigh. The power pump whined, flooding his system with coagulant. He wasn't dead, but the pain had his eyes bulging out of his head. Tumbling backward, he knocked over 2 plastic waiting chairs and scrambled into the furthest corner of the hall, pasting himself to the baseboards, absolutely paralyzed with fear. Over 300 miserable New Jerseyans erupted in a barrage of savage cursing. People were whipping crumpled driving applications at him. Others were standing on the railings, shoving to get closer. If that metal maze of stanchions hadn't blocked the path, Zorn would have been stomped into a 2-dimensional green stain on the floor. Tony hoisted his 24-inch heavy wrench back over his shoulder. He spat a wad of tobacco-laced saliva and jerked his chin toward the counter. This prick cuts the line and pulls a knife. You want me to drag his ass out front so he can start over? Dolores remained completely deadpan. She blew a perfectly round pink bubble. It popped on her chin. Without even batting an eye, she went right back to squaring up her stack of blank 8C forms. Wait for your number to be called. The second the words left her mouth, a heavy, rhythmic thud echoed from the front entrance. Armored boots were grinding up the concrete stairs. A thick, menacing shadow crept through the sliding doors, slowly washing over the green blood pooled on the linoleum. Up in the command bridge of the Syndic dreadnought, General Vlack had his blue compound eyes glued to the tactical holoscreen. The comms link suddenly exploded with the heavy panting of the support infantry captain. General, the natives aren't fighting by the rules of engagement. They aren't using directed energy weapons. Assault. Vaporize the entire lobby. Vlack screamed, slamming his fist against the already fractured ceramic console. Down on the ground, 50 fully armored Syndic elites triggered their antimatter shields simultaneously. Cold blue halos enveloped their 9-foot frames as they charged up the front steps into the lobby. The muzzles of their multi-phase rifles were already glowing with a lethal charge. Bob, the driving examiner, was waiting at the top of the stairs, clutching a dry chemical fire extinguisher. He yanked the safety pin. High-pressure chemical powder blasted everywhere. Antimatter shields stop energy rounds just fine. They do not, however, stop ultra-fine chemical dust from completely clogging every optical sensor on a helmet. The vanguard infantry instantly went totally blind, swinging their rifles wildly as they blindly groped forward. The brutal Jersey cold snap had frozen a puddle that had been leaking all night in the corner of the stairs. A slick patch of black ice was now completely hidden beneath the white powder. The first 20 heavy infantry stepped right onto it. Their massive armored boots slipped right out from under them. 1-ton bodies slammed dead weight onto the concrete steps. Antimatter shields don't negate kinetic fall damage. A synchronized chorus of 20 distinct bone snaps blasted through the comms straight into Vlack's eardrums. 20 vital sign readouts flatlined past the safety threshold. The vanguard was paralyzed on the stairs, completely out of commission. The remaining 30 troopers stumbled around blind. The sharp clatter of metal colliding drew closer. A human riot shield slammed directly into the back of the frontline infantryman. A 300-pound polycarbonate riot shield, powered by the combined shoving muscle of anxious student drivers, grocery clerks, and retired postmen, rammed hard into the blind alien squad. It bulldozed them straight into the twisting metal maze of the queue line. The Syndic troopers flailed their rifles in the dark. Their shields smashed against the unforgiving iron stanchions, sending showers of sparks flying off the weld. But they couldn't see a damn thing. They had no choice but to let the human tide force them deeper into the narrow aisles. Tony stood dead center at the aisle entrance, legs planted wide, his 24-inch wrench resting casually on his shoulder. The second a giant alien helmet popped out of the meat grinder, Tony swung. He brought the wrench down hard on an armored elbow. There was a sickening crunch, and the arm went totally limp. Over by the wall, Carmine leaned casually against the plaster, smoking down the last of his menthol. He was twirling his 20-year-old steel parking boot in his hands, letting the afternoon sun gleam off the cold metal. He looked exactly like an old trapper waiting to bag his limit. The moment the 30 hulking Syndic elites were herded in, the entrance was promptly jammed shut by a grandma's folding grocery cart. The exit was barricaded solid by a dozen burly guys waiting to get their CDL. These interstellar conquerors were squeezed so tight they were practically glued to the cold linoleum. They didn't even have the elbow room to pull a trigger. The chemical powder plastered to their visors wouldn't come off. Translators spat out a garbled mess of frantic alien cursing. Chests compressed tight, unable to draw breath. All they could muster were pathetic, muffled groans. The entire DMV lobby descended into a surreal, quiet. Aside from the muffled wheezing of the aliens, the only sound was Dolores loudly smacking her pink bubblegum. The original dozen heavy assault troopers were pinned in the corner. 20 support infantry with shattered legs were paralyzed on the front stairs. 30 blinded elites were gridlocked in the waiting line. 2 anti-grav hover tanks were sitting dead in the parking lot fire lane. The entire glorious Syndic invasion force was completely neutralized, boxed up in a few square yards of space, totally incapable of moving. High above in the Dreadnought's command bridge, the holoscreen broadcast the utter humiliation in crystal clarity. General Vlack's cold blue skin had darkened to a deep, infuriated plum. His massive, bony claws slammed down onto the direct comms linked to Windows 6, his knuckles popping under the strain. He was a warlord of the Syndic hegemony, ruler of 12 star systems. His fleet's shields could weather solar flares. His rifles could obliterate asteroids. And now an entire elite strike force had been dismantled inside a primitive department of motor vehicle. Every tactical simulation was reduced to dog shit. There was no glorious exchange of artillery, no brutal trench warfare, just an endless waiting line, improperly formatted paperwork, and the completely incomprehensible logic of parking boots. His heavy, hissing breaths rattled through the vents of his exoskeleton. He crushed the direct comms button while simultaneously disengaging the final safety interlock on the orbital cannon. Gravity targeting arrays instantly locked onto the New Jersey DMV coordinate. Cryo-cooled muzzles swiveled slowly into position in low orbit. Antimatter warheads reported full charge. Listen closely, primitive designated as Windows 6 authority, the universal translator converted his guttural snarl into a harsh, grating English. I am General Vlack of the Syndic hegemony. You will release my forces immediately and surrender sovereignty of that structure. Defy me, and I will vaporize the entire state of New Jersey into a sea of glass in exactly 10 minutes. The packed lobby went dead quiet. Over 300 gazes, fueled by an entire afternoon of raw aggravation, snapped right over to the bulletproof glass of Windows 6. Beneath the counter, the peeling, ancient hardline intercom lit up bright red. Static hissed through the circuits, filling half the room with an electric crackle. Dolores pinched half a wad of soft pink gum between her fingertips. Face completely devoid of expression, she tilted her chin up. She didn't even bother pushing up her slipping reading glasses. Her rough, wrinkled hand just grabbed the buzzing intercom receiver and pressed it to her ear. This is Dolores at Windows 6. Her dry drawl carried over the static, echoing across the hall. Freeing up her other hand, she took a thick stack of barcoded violation slips from Carmine, who was leaning casually against her counter. She slammed the stack down hard on the bulletproof counter, making the dust jump. Destruction of state property. That be the ticketing machine you boys blew up. That's a $2,000 fine. Duh, His tone was exactly the same as when she rejected a botched form. Flat, monotonous, utterly immovable. Unauthorized airdrop of heavy debris in a public parking lot, meaning your 2 hover tanks and your 50 tin soldiers. That's a $10,000 fine. Her cheek bulged as she worked the gum around. She paused, making sure to enunciate the regulations crystal clear. You want to shoot your cannons? Be my guest. But you're gonna pay this $12,000 balance first. You sign, you stamp, and you process the paperwork. Otherwise, the Global Federal Transit Authority is going to flag every last vessel in the Syndic hegemony as credit bankrupt. You will never renew another intersector transit permit, and you will never dock at another human-controlled port for the rest of eternity. The entire lobby erupted in uproarious laughter. Tony smacked his 24-inch wrench into his palm a few times and bellowed, "Damn straight. You ain't firing shit till you pay your fees." The drivers around him hollered in agreement, their shouts making the bulletproof glass vibrate. The static on the intercom abruptly cut out. The only sound coming down the line was the heavy, accelerating hyperventilation echoing from the Dreadnought Bridge, completely cutting through the noise of the lobby. Up in the cold blue light of the command bridge, General Vlack's optical sensors were fixated entirely on the intercom speaker. Duh. Lore is warning, dripping with the sickening sweetness of pink bubblegum, was violently ricocheting around his internal tactical processor. $12,000 in fines. Pan-galactic credit bankruptcy. Permanent revocation of all transit licenses for the entire hegemony. This non-linear mimetic assault had completely short-circuited his flawless, linear tactical logic. He had served in the military for 500 cycles. He had won 17 interstellar campaigns. He had survived his entire career by ruthlessly executing high command orders and meticulously calculating the impact trajectory of every single antimatter shell. Never had an enemy pointed a weaponized license revocation straight at his face. His claws dug deep into the shattered ceramic of his control panel. Cold blue alien blood trickled down the cracked console, but he couldn't even feel the pain. Vlack rapidly filtered through every available tactical option. Ground assault. His entire elite force was already in the dirt. Level the place with orbital bombardment. Article 14 of the Syndic Hegemony Rules of Conquest was brutally clear. Unauthorized destruction of a target zone without a signed declaration of conquest from the local administrative body will result in immediate revocation of the commanding officer's license and total imperial credit liquidation. He wouldn't even get his goddamn pension. He'd spend the rest of his miserable life mining anti-ore on a tramp freighter. He gasped lungfuls of metallic life support gas. His optical sensors burned cherry red. His palm, dripping with cold sweat, trembled as he reached for the bottom edge of his console, toward the red button with stark white lettering. The fleet-wide emergency evacuation abort trigger. His claw hovered less than a centimeter from the cold surface. Overload klaxons were shredding his eardrums, the entire dreadnought shuddering under his feet. Clenching every muscle in his body, his fingertip finally slammed down on the button. An encrypted quantum retreat cipher instantly pierced the atmosphere, hitting every single immobilized Syndic unit inside the New Jersey DMV. The dreadnought's warning sirens shrieked through Vlack's auditory nerve. Flashing red strobes painted the congealed blue blood on his face, an eerie, violent crimson. He stared blankly at the tactical map. The green dots representing his combat units began to flash one by one with the brilliant white light of emergency teleportation. The 30 blinded infantry wedged into the vision test queue didn't even have room to squirm. Teleportation beams engulfed them, shooting straight through the roof as their dots vanished from the screen. The 20 crippled troopers lying in the parking lot puddles were violently yanked into the sky, leaving not a single scrap of armor behind. Huddled in the corner of the waiting room, shaking like a leaf, Captain Zorn, his shattered hand draining his suit's power down to the critical red line, received the order. He didn't even get the chance to scream one last Imperial war cry before the white light swallowed him whole. The soldiers who had passed out from the crush were beamed out in their sleep. The core components of the 2 disabled hover tanks were extracted, leaving behind nothing but a few chunks of discarded hull plating. The white flares faded from the tactical map. The very last green blip, completely vanished from the DMV coordinates. The screen showed nothing but a vacant, motionless grid. The command bridge fell dead silent. Only the low thrum of the ventilation ducts vibrated against the hull. Down in the New Jersey DMV, the blinding flashes completely subsided. A harsh stench of burnt ozone hung in the air, mixing aggressively with the smell of popcorn and cheap coffee. A trail of pitch-black scorch marks marred the linoleum. Nestled beneath the metal-lined stanchions, half an inch of a gunmetal gray vibro dagger hilt peeked out, lightly dusted with drywall, sitting perfectly still. 300-plus New Jersey inns, having stood in line all goddamn afternoon, stood stunned for about 3 seconds. Then, the entire room erupted in uproarious cheers. People were banging on the rails, whistling, kicking alien shrapnel around on the floor to take home as souvenirs. Tony shouldered his massive 24-inch pipe wrench and shoved past the driver's ed kid. Following the trail of black scorch marks, he marched over to the railing, his eyes locked dead on that little sliver of exposed gunmetal. He wedged the heavy jaws of his wrench into the gap and gave it a solid pry. The hilt wiggled loose and dropped. He caught it out of the air and weighed it in his palm. The damn thing was heavier than the mallet he used to bust cast iron pipe. He blew the dust off the edge. The gleaming silver blade didn't have a single scratch on it, radiating a frosty chill that crept right up his knuckles to his elbow. Unzipping the beat-up canvas tool bag on his hip, Tony shoved the Syndic vibro dagger right in. He packed it down on top of a half-used roll of Teflon tape and a spare crescent wrench, then zipped it shut with a firm click. Dolores leaned back in her swivel chair at window 6. She scraped the last bit of pink bubble gum off her cheek. With her eyelids practically at half-mast, her rough knuckle pressed down hard on her console. The plastic button clicked deep into its housing. The roaring cheers in the lobby instantly choked out. The smell of sweat and the haze of dry chemical smoke hung stagnant in the air. The metal labyrinth of stanchions was bent out of shape in 3 different spots. 7 blackened craters marked the linoleum where the aliens had emergency beamed out. Half a splatter of cold blue blood was still drying on the inside of the bulletproof glass. 320 New Jersey inns stood dead still, clutching their paper tickets, all eyes locked squarely on Dolores. The intercom crackled for 2 long seconds. The ancient DMV PA system spat out a rigidly precise computerized voice that shook loose a few more flakes of ceiling dust, now serving number 4093 at window 6. Leaning against the front door frame, Carmine lit up the dead half of his menthol. He blew a smoke ring that drifted lazily over a busted plastic chair. Tony leaned against the rail, kicked his tool bag, now containing a military-grade alien weapon, closer to his boot, and cracked open a half-warm beer with his teeth. Bob tucked his clipboard behind his back, hoisted his chipped bullhorn, and bellowed, 4093. "Where the hell are you at?" Deep in the bowels of the Q maze, a 17-year-old kid in a baseball cap jumped out of his skin. He nearly dropped his crumpled paper ticket. Clutching the slip, he squeezed his way through the winding rails. He nodded nervously at Tony with his tool bag and Carmine with his smoke until he sidled up to window 6. His voice was shaking. "I am 4093. Just here to get my learner's permit physical form stamped." Dolores stared right through him. A fresh pink bubble ballooned out of her mouth to the size of a grapefruit. It popped wetly against the bulletproof glass, leaving a sticky, pale pink residue. She stuck her sugary hand straight through the mail slot, palm open, striking the exact same pose she used to reject the Declaration of Conquest. "Hand over your paperwork."
Writing this story was an absolute blast. At its core, this is a love letter to the humanity, fuck yeah, genre, but I intentionally wanted to strip away the usual sci-fi tropes. There are no power-armored space marines here, and no epic orbital dogfights. Instead, I wanted to focus on the purest, most concentrated form of human stubbornness imaginable, a New Jersey DMV on a Tuesday afternoon. The core concept of pitting a mathematically perfect, technologically supreme alien armada against the absolute non-linear, soul-crushing chaos of human bureaucracy felt like the ultimate low-tech subversion. There is something fundamentally hilarious about the idea that an antimatter shield, engineered to withstand the fury of a dying sun, is rendered entirely useless by a 20-pound steel parking boot or a frustrated driving instructor armed with a fire extinguisher. While shaping the narrative and iterating on the scenes in my collaborative writing workbench, I focused heavily on nailing that specific contrast. The Syndic aliens operate on rigid corporate military logic, while humanity responds with raw, unfiltered, blue-collar grit. It's a fun reminder that our greatest superpower in the cosmos might not be our advanced technology. It's our sheer audacity, our resilience, and our universal, unspoken agreement that absolutely no one is allowed to cut the line. Watching characters like Tony with his trusty pipe wrench and Dolores with her impenetrable apathy come to life has been incredibly satisfying. It's exactly the kind of universe I love building, one where even the most fearsome interstellar conquerors are forced to sit down, shut up, and wait for their number to be called.